I'm 24, my boyfriend Andrew is 26, and we've been together for 5 years. We first met at a house party during my sophomore year of college, a party I never even wanted to attend. My roommate practically dragged me there, saying I needed to get out more instead of hiding in my room all the time. That night Andrew showed up with a few of his friends, and he was instantly the center of attention, cracking jokes and telling stories that had everyone laughing. When I went to grab another drink, he and I struck up a conversation, and from the very beginning it just felt easy, like we clicked right away. Andrew has always been the funny one in our circle of friends, the guy pulling pranks and keeping the mood light. Back when we first started dating, his pranks were small, harmless things that honestly felt kind of sweet. He'd set up scavenger hunts across campus that ended with a picnic or a little surprise gift, or he'd pretend to forget my birthday before pulling off some thoughtful surprise later. I never minded because it was playful, and I even got him back with pranks of my own sometimes. 3 years into our relationship, we moved in together. It wasn't anything huge, just a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood. Technically, the second bedroom was supposed to be an office, but in reality it turned into a storage unit for all the extra things we didn't know where else to put. Around that time, we started saving seriously for a house. In fact, just recently we'd even found one we both really liked. Overall, life was good. Sure, we argued now and then, but nothing out of the ordinary. He'd leave his clothes scattered across the floor, or I'd take too long in the shower and use up all the hot water. It was the usual couple stuff. At least that's what I believed. As time went on, though, his pranks started to lose their charm. Instead of sweet surprises, they became more irritating. He'd hide my car keys when I was already late for work, or tell me my mom had called about some emergency when she hadn't. Once, he convinced me our landlord was selling the building and we only had 2 weeks to move out. I spent days stressing over apartment listings before he finally admitted it was just a joke. I was furious, and he promised he'd never pull something like that again. But in reality, he just shifted gears and found new ways to mess with me. Sometimes he'd jump out from behind a door just to scare me, or swap the sugar in my coffee with salt. Once he claimed my car had been towed when it was really just parked on the other side of the lot. I'd get annoyed, sure, but usually I brushed it off because that's just Andrew always joking around. And when I did get upset, he'd guilt me by saying things like, "I was just trying to make you laugh. You used to have a sense of humor." Eventually, I stopped fighting him on it and just got used to it. But a few days ago, he went way too far. What happened crossed every possible line, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. That morning started off completely ordinary. I was asleep when Andrew shook me awake at 7 a.m., which was strange because on weekends he usually sleeps in. He seemed excited, almost giddy, and told me to get up because he was taking me to the spa. I was confused. It wasn't my birthday, our anniversary, or any special date I could think of, but I wasn't about to turn down a spa day. So I got ready, and off we went to this fancy spa downtown, the one I'd always dreamed of trying but never thought we could afford. He paid for everything, and when I asked what the occasion was, he just smiled and said, "Can't I treat my girlfriend sometimes?" I had my suspicions, but I figured maybe he'd gotten a bonus at work that he hadn't mentioned yet. After the spa, he surprised me again by saying he'd made dinner reservations at this high-end waterfront restaurant with a glass ceiling, another place I'd always wanted to try. At that point I knew something was going on, but he kept insisting it was just a nice day out. The restaurant was incredible, probably the fanciest place I'd ever been. When the waiter brought champagne that Andrew had pre-ordered, I started to feel butterflies in my stomach. I couldn't help thinking maybe this was all leading up to something big. Over dinner, we chatted casually at first, and then Andrew brought up the house we'd been looking at. He painted little pictures of us decorating it together and even mentioned turning one of the rooms into a nursery someday. That made me blush. We'd never really talked about kids before. Everything felt perfect, and for the first time in a while, I could see us building a real future together. Then, after we finished the main course but before dessert arrived, Andrew's whole demeanor shifted. He got quiet, took my hand across the table, and stared straight into my eyes. Then he stood up, and my heart stopped because I knew exactly what was happening. He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the restaurant. People around us fell silent, some even pulled out their phones to record. Andrew pulled a small black velvet box from his jacket and started a speech about how I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever met, how from the very first date he knew I was different, and how he couldn't imagine living without me. By the time he asked, "Will you marry me, my princess?" I was already in tears. Without hesitation, I said yes. The moment I said yes, the entire restaurant broke into applause. An older couple sitting nearby were smiling through tears, clearly touched by what they thought they had just witnessed. The waiter even came over with another round of champagne, this time on the house. But then, in an instant, the whole moment shattered. Andrew opened the box, and instead of a ring, there was just a tiny folded slip of paper. His smile wasn't the warm, loving one I knew. It was this strange, twisted grin that immediately made my stomach drop. I unfolded the note with shaking hands, and there it was in his handwriting: "You've been pranked." The sound of his laughter still echoes in my head. He wasn't just chuckling, he was practically doubled over, laughing so hard like he'd just pulled off the greatest joke in history. He kept saying between laughs, "Baby, it was just a prank. I'm nowhere near ready to marry you yet. You should have seen your face." The entire restaurant froze. No one knew how to react. The older couple who had been so touched seconds earlier looked absolutely horrified. The waiters stood awkwardly, unsure if they should step in or walk away. I just sat there, tears streaming down my cheeks, except now they weren't happy tears, they were tears of humiliation. He actually tried to lean in and hug me, as if we were in on this joke together. That's when my hand moved before I could even think. I slapped him hard. I've never hit anyone in my life, but I swear it felt like my body acted on its own. Then I grabbed my purse, stood up, and told him flat out, "We're done, you scumbag." And I walked out of there. Since he had driven us, I had no choice but to call an Uber. The whole ride home, I sobbed uncontrollably, to the point the driver asked if I needed to go to a hospital. I told him no, that I was just heartbroken. He was kind enough to wait in his car until I got safely inside my building before pulling away. As soon as I got in, I threw together a small bag with essentials and called my friend Lisa. I barely got the words out before she told me to come over right away. She didn't ask questions, she didn't hesitate, she just opened her home. I didn't leave Andrew a note. Honestly, I didn't think he deserved one. Since then, my phone has been blowing up. At first, his texts were all about how I was overreacting. Things like, "Babe, it was just a joke. Come on, you know I love you." I just wasn't ready to propose yet. But the tone quickly shifted. Soon he was sending desperate messages: "Please come home. I'm sorry. I can't sleep without you. Just talk to me." I haven't responded to a single one. Instead, I keep replaying that awful moment in my head, the look on his face, the laughter, the silence of the restaurant. I really thought we were building something real. We'd been saving for a house, talking about getting a dog, planning a vacation to see his family. Now all of that feels like it's crumbled to pieces. Part of me wants to cut him off completely, but our lives are so tangled together. We share an apartment, a bank account, years of memories. And I hate admitting this, but a tiny part of me still loves him despite what he did. Lisa keeps telling me to block him and move on, but it isn't that simple. And yeah, I've asked myself, am I really the bad guy here for breaking up with him over what he insists was just a prank? Update: since people wanted an update, here it is. First of all, no, I didn't know about the prank beforehand. Some of you suggested maybe I was in on it, which is just ridiculous. Why would I humiliate myself like that? And yes, the spa and the dinner were real. He paid for everything. A few people wondered if maybe he had actually planned to propose but chickened out at the last minute and tried to cover it as a joke. I considered that too, but after what happened next, I don't believe that's the case. After leaving, I stayed at Lisa's for a few days. She was amazing, let me cry as much as I needed, and we distracted ourselves with trashy reality TV. I even turned my phone off most of the time because Andrew wouldn't stop messaging. When I finally turned it back on, I had 47 missed calls and more than 100 texts, not only from him but also from mutual friends asking what happened. Turns out, he'd been telling everyone that I stormed out over a harmless prank. That infuriated me. So I decided to confront him directly. I went back to our apartment without telling him I was coming. When I walked in, he was still in his pajamas, in the middle of the afternoon, looking like he hadn't slept or showered in days. For one brief second, I almost pitied him. But then I remembered the humiliation, and that sympathy evaporated. I told him point blank we were done. I said I couldn't stay with someone who, after 5 years, still wasn't serious about marriage and thought it was funny to embarrass me like that in public. That's when things turned nasty. At first, he cried and begged me to reconsider. He said he loved me more than anything, that he couldn't live without me, that he'd give up pranking forever. But once he realized I wasn't changing my mind, his mood flipped. Suddenly, he was screaming, calling me every horrible name he could think of. He yelled about how I was a selfish, ungrateful bitch for walking away after everything he'd done for me. He went on this long tirade, bringing up how he supported me when my dad passed away, how he'd always been there, how he'd just spent so much money on the spa and dinner, as if that erased the humiliation he put me through. He cursed and ranted to the point I stopped listening. The one thing that burned itself into my memory was when he shouted, "Stop being so petty and just drop it. You know we're happy together. You know you still want me." That was the breaking point for me. I snapped and called Andrew every name I could think of, laying into him about his pranks and how childish his behavior had become. We were both screaming so loud that at one point our neighbor actually banged on the wall to get us to stop. That moment jolted us out of the chaos, and we managed to calm down enough to talk about logistics. We agreed not to renew our lease, and until it ended he would stay in the guest room. I spent the rest of that day clearing out space so he could move his things in there. Afterward, I got online and started looking at apartments I might be able to swing on my own. The problem was, our lease still had 4 months left, and the rental market wasn't exactly forgiving. Ideally, we'd find someone to take it over, but I knew that would be difficult. Even with that plan, Andrew refused to accept the breakup. All day long, he tried to talk to me, saying things like, "Can't we just try again?" It was one mistake at dinner. We ordered takeout that night, and instead of eating together like we used to, I sat in the bedroom while he stayed in the living room. He even came knocking on my door, asking if we could talk like adults. I told him we already had, and there was nothing left to say. Later that evening, his family got involved. He must have told them a completely twisted version of the story, because his mom called me furious. She accused me of being selfish and incapable of handling a simple joke. She said Andrew had planned the spa day for weeks just to make me happy, which might be true, but that didn't excuse the cruel ending. The call ended with her flat out calling me a bitch before hanging up, which I found pretty rich coming from a woman who cheated on her husband and thought no one knew. After that, the floodgates opened. His siblings, his dad, even his aunt started reaching out, all saying the same thing, that I was overreacting, that Andrew was heartbroken, that I should give him another chance. His younger sister, who I used to be close with, sent me this long guilt-tripping message about how he'd been crying nonstop and couldn't eat or sleep. His older brother, who I never liked anyway, was more blunt. He called me a heartless bitch for throwing away a good man over nothing. I tried blocking their numbers, but they kept finding ways to get through. His mom even emailed me at work. I don't know how she got that address, but it left me feeling exhausted, constantly having to defend myself to people who weren't even there that night and had no idea what actually happened. At that point, I focused all my energy on moving forward, selling off things I didn't need anymore, searching for a new place, and dealing with the apartment mess. Andrew and I tried to keep things civil when we had to talk, but the air was heavy every time. He'd give me those sad puppy dog eyes that once melted me, but now just made me angry. On top of that, we had to untangle our finances. Thankfully, we didn't share everything, but we did have a joint savings account for the house down payment. I planned to go to the bank the next day to figure out how to split it. And then there was all the shared furniture and belongings. It was clear dividing everything was going to be a nightmare. I was grateful for the support I got from people online who reassured me I wasn't overreacting. It made me feel less alone. Update 2: so much has happened since that post, I don't even know where to start. Let's begin with the living arrangement, which fell apart almost immediately. The plan for him to stay in the guest room lasted only a few days. Every night we ended up in screaming matches. He'd start out apologetic, then get angry when I didn't give in, and finally blame me for ruining everything over a joke. The first night was manageable, we kept our distance, and I thought maybe we could stick it out until the lease ended. But on the second night, he knocked on my door around midnight, clearly drunk, begging me to talk. I refused to open the door, and eventually he staggered away. The third night was the tipping point. He came home from work already in a mood, slamming doors and muttering under his breath. When I asked what was wrong, he exploded, shouting that I was his problem, that I was being unreasonable, that I was throwing away 5 years over one little mistake. The fight escalated until he hurled a glass at the wall, not at me, but still close enough to terrify me. I locked myself in my room and called Lisa, sobbing. That was when I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. Lisa offered me a place to stay until I could find my own, and I didn't hesitate. The next day, while Andrew was at work, I packed as much as I could fit in my car clothes, personal things, some kitchen items that were definitely mine, and left. I wrote him a note saying where I'd gone and that I'd be in touch about the apartment. When he came home and found me gone, he completely lost it. He called my phone nonstop for hours. When I finally answered, he bounced between crying and screaming. He accused me of abandoning him, of stealing things from the apartment. I tried to explain I'd only taken my own belongings, but he wouldn't hear it. He even threatened to report my car as stolen, even though it's legally in my name, and said he'd dump the rest of my stuff on the street if I didn't come back immediately. I was worried he might do something reckless, so I called his brother, the only one in that family who seemed remotely reasonable, and asked him to check in. Thankfully, he agreed. Later, he texted me saying Andrew was fine, just upset, and that he'd stay with him for a while. The apartment situation is still unresolved, but the worst moment since has been running into Andrew's mom at the mall. I was shopping for clothes, minding my own business, when I heard someone shout my name. I turned around, and there she was, storming toward me with fury written all over her face. Right there in the middle of the mall, she started screaming at me. People stopped to stare as she shouted things like, "How could you do this to my son? You're a terrible human being." She claimed I had ruined Andrew's life and that I'd regret throwing away a good man. I didn't even bother to defend myself, I just walked away. But I could still hear her yelling as I left, and it was so bad a security guard actually asked if I needed help. It was humiliating and surreal all at once. The messages from Andrew, his friends, and his family haven't stopped either. They've gotten nastier. Some said things like, "No one would care if you died. You're a waste of space. You're a selfish slut." Others claimed I was pathetic for leaving over a small joke. A few even came from numbers I didn't recognize, threatening me by saying they knew where I worked and were watching me. I reported those to the police, but they basically brushed me off, saying they couldn't do much unless something actually happened. I try to ignore the messages, but sometimes they break me down, and I find myself sobbing. Lisa has been incredible. She's held me while I cried, reminded me I made the right decision, and even confiscated my phone for a weekend so I could disconnect from all the toxicity. This whole nightmare has also revealed who my real friends are. Some people I thought I could count on have sided with Andrew, saying I was too harsh or that I should have given him another chance. That's been painful to realize, but also eye-opening. Right now, I'm searching for my own apartment. It's hard to find something affordable on just my salary, so I may need to get a roommate, which isn't ideal, but it's still better than crashing with Lisa forever or worse, going back to Andrew. Honestly, the whole situation still feels surreal. If someone had told me a month ago that I'd be single, living with a friend, and dealing with harassment from my ex and his family, I never would have believed it. Andrew and I had been together so long that I thought our future was secure. I built my whole life around that assumption, and now I have to rebuild everything from scratch.